Hey everybody, welcome to the DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me as always, my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. And this is a very special episode because we are now celebrating the 10th release of a movie by DBS Films, and that's The Haunting of the Murder House. We've officially hit 10 movies. Again, be sure to take a look at our Discord for all more information. You can find it now on Amazon. It is The Haunting of the Murder House. So, before we hop in, 10 movies, man. How does it feel?
It's definitely been a process. I think that we've learned a lot. I think that this has been much more interesting and difficult than I anticipated. But I do feel that we're at a level now where, we can tell a story. And I think that is the first step in the filmmaking process, is to be able to tell a story within your budget and the means that you have. So I think we're at that level. And now I think we're just going to have exponential growth, because if you can tell a good story, then a lot of the other stuff, as far as building characters and pacing your movies properly and just really just honing in the story aspect, is in our reach now. Because before, we had to worry about technical issues, we had to worry about crew issues, we had to worry about working with the actors. There's a lot of things that kind of took away from the story that I had to focus my attention on. And I think now we're at the level where it's like, okay, we can tell a good story and we can get feedback on that story. And I think that's absolutely crucial, because you can't get better until you get feedback on the story. If your audience is saying, hey, your characters are one-dimensional, they don't have a lot of depth, well, then that's on me to go in there and just try and create more unique characters, give them more depth, and tell that story within the hour and 20 minutes that were allotted.
Yeah, it really is a big step up. And I think specifically, kind of to piggyback on what you're saying there, I think the big difference was the confidence coming into this one was different, because we had The Girl in Cabin 13 under our belt, in the sense of getting through that production. So in this episode and the next episode, we're going to actually look at The Haunting of the Murder House, and we're going to kind of go through, in this episode, we're going to get kind of the grander schemes and what it meant for DBS as a production. And then in the next episode, part 2, we're actually going to go through each section of the movie just to some degree and kind of talk about the different parts of it and how they came together. So, to go back to kind of the overall things, the way I see this one was, this was the first one that we were like, okay, let's embrace this model and movie making of having it a smaller set. Because do you want to talk briefly about how The Girl in Cabin 13, that one was a risk from the very beginning, just because it was our first time taking over a lot of the roles. It was your first time as cinematographer. We could have just ended up with a bunch of, non-usable footage and not even had a movie potentially. So after finishing The Girl in Cabin 13, we were able to kind of look at Murder House and be like, okay, let's go. We can do this.
Yeah, I definitely, finishing Cabin 13 and that movie getting the reception that it did, just the confidence from passing quality control to the conversations with the distribution companies, and then just seeing it, shoot up the charts when we did release it, gave me a lot of confidence. I think that, as we were writing The Murder House, we kept adding things on because we were confident in our ability to get this movie completed. So I definitely think it was a stepping stone, but I think all our movies are going to be stepping stones from here on out. Girl in Cabin 13 is a stepping stone to Murder House, which is a stepping stone to Shapeshifter, and then it's a stepping stone to Into the Forest 2.0. So I think you're getting better on a technical level. You're getting better on a, just a directing level, as in, my vision. I'm getting better at communicating to the actors and working with my team. But then everyone else, that we work with, we pull a lot of people, we bring people back, and they're getting experience and reps as well. So we're kind of creating this kind of like very learning environment that I think a lot of people benefit from, not just our company. And at the same time, we're looking to expand that. We're trying to cast more people from the Discord. We're always looking for good actors. We're always looking for people who are just motivated and are talented and, are willing to put in the work with us, because we're still not professionals. We're still trying to figure this whole thing out. The difference between us and other indie filmmakers is we have these 10 movies to fall back on. this is our portfolio. We could show it to other people. And I think that just makes it a lot easier.
It really is something where you can just feel the momentum as we're gaining because, you know, we already have another movie done. We're getting the casting up for our newest film as well too. So really just a ton of momentum coming off the backs of this. Again, we finished production of this movie in November. We did have to do pickup shots for me in the van, which took a little bit longer. So I think it was like February when we like officially had everything. But this was a very quick turnaround in the sense of, you know, getting things in motion and whatnot. And I think, you know, the biggest thing that I kind of walked away from the haunting of the murder house was you really did have a sense of like, okay, we're actually getting really good at this. You know, Girl in Cabin 13, I think that production was a lot more risky at certain moments. You know, there were just timeline crunches and kind of things there. Whereas The Haunting of the Murder House was the first movie that, you know, we've mentioned it before, we're always probably going to film it to the last second we have. But to me, this was the first time that we had a production which was just a lot smoother with it. And I think that just led to a lot more confidence to move forward with Shapeshifter, to move forward with Into the Forest. So, do you want to talk about how having that momentum of a successful production allows us to quickly take the next steps versus like when you come off of a production with, you know, the Morgan Estate or The Devil in the Room, you're basically like, oh my gosh, you're putting a lot more mental work behind how do we fix this versus the Murder House, which was like, okay, I think we got something good here.
Yeah, I would say Murder House would be the first one, like probably the easiest shoot all the way through. And I'd probably say like Suicide House is probably the easiest one as far as like, you know, we left that shoot with everything that we thought that we needed. There wasn't any pickups. You know, everything's, you know, felt really good about the process. The difference was like that was a found footage movie and it was super basic and it wouldn't hit the hour 20 runtime. So for this one, it was a longer movie. We had more coverage, we had more shots, we had a lot of different stuff, a lot of technical stuff in there. The Ouija board scene is just a massive scene. The climax is a massive scene. There's a lot of really technical things in that movie. And I think it adds to the production value. But I mean, leaving that set, we knew we had to do the van pickup stuff with Kel. But I mean, we felt comfortable with that. It was just a van. I had an idea of how I wanted to shoot it. So I think it does give you confidence. And I think even with the shapeshifter was smooth. But there was like a part in there where it was getting a little hectic. But I think it's going to be rare to go through an entire shoot and have them all be very smooth and easy to go just because we only have 8 days to shoot these. So we're already almost 50% less time than most people have. Most shoots that do these kind of movies are usually about 13 to 14 days. They have a little bit of rest periods in there. You know, we just do 8 days straight. And so I think that kind of limits like our ability to really do a lot of things. And it just puts a lot of stress on you. And, you know, we come back to it when we talk about our filmmaking tips. If you can get one more day, you're going to have a much better, you know, chance of success and you're going to be a lot less stressed. That being said, I always think you should try and shoot one as quickly as possible because you get an idea of how time moves. The one thing you don't want is to have a whole bunch of time and then slow down and then you have to catch up again. So it's just a learning process, learn how to schedule. But I think that, you know, having these smooth shoots, not having these crazy crunch times and getting everything that you think you need to make a good movie is a sign of you just maturing as a filmmaker.
Yeah, it really is a big one. And, you know, I think looking at it overall, that's the, you know, big stepping stone that I point to and how it kind of fits in with DVS. But let's kind of get a little bit more tactical into what made it such an easy process. And I think the first thing, and one of the reasons I was really excited about this one, is it was the first time we revisited one of our past concepts. So for those of you who have seen The Haunting of the Suicide House, which we mentioned is by far the easiest one that we've been through, we basically took the main concept idea of it and we knew it did well because it performed well, but we also knew, you know, an understanding of how it worked. Now, again, that was found footage. This is cinematic. And honestly, you can watch both movies and you could not even draw the slightest conclusion that one was the other unless you're really looking for it because of how different they are. But with that being said, this was the first time we took an idea. So going into even the script and the concept process, really is very smooth to just kind of already have a structure for what this movie was going to be.
Yeah, and it's definitely, it makes it a lot easier. It's easier to write and it's easier to shoot. And it's pretty crazy because we really didn't use a lot of stuff from the first movie. The first Suicide House movie, that the Murder House is based on, just had a lot of stuff that we needed to throw out. I think the core concept was good, where there are paranormal YouTubers that go into the house. We kept that. And pretty much we threw everything else out. There really wasn't a lot of stuff in there that we wanted to use because the feedback on the movie was so negative. The only story feedback we really got was just people were confused about like what was actually happening. So we did take that to heart and really wanted to make sure that, look, the Murder House is a possession movie, right? And this guy, he got possessed and he killed people. And, this is essentially what happens. We told the viewer 3 or 4 different times to make sure that they understood when you get to the climax of the movie, what exactly is going on. So as far as story, that was like what we wanted to really focus on. But as far as the technical shots, as far as the pop scares, as far as like the overall flow of the movie, I think we really got rid of everything. There's not a lot of stuff in there that we kept just because, I felt like that movie, while it did perform really well, the reviews are fairly negative. And I thought it was just better to start anew, and try and write a screenplay that just focuses on stuff that we've done before or stuff that we've done in pre-production that we know that can actually, work.
Oh yeah, and I definitely agree. I mean, we really kind of ripped the guts out of it, but to me, the core idea is, a group of YouTubers, they go into a house, it's a possession story. So those were the main things. And then from there, we connected the dots. And the biggest difference is, we had 4 more movies essentially filmed from that point of the Suicide House to where we're at now. So we were able to connect the dots and say, this scene worked, this scene doesn't work, this scene did work, this scene doesn't work. I think the biggest thing that I was the most excited for going into this one, and it was because of seeing The Girl in Cabin 13. One, I love the idea that it had more of a deeper plot, which is great, the possession and whatnot. But I think the second thing, and the one I kind of want to talk about, because I think it can be an indie pitfall, this is something where I'd really look forward to having 4 characters, and specifically a cutaway character. And I think one of the biggest issues that happened in Girl in Cabin 13 is you basically had Sonny and Brad. And when you only have 2 people, one of those people basically has to be like, I don't know, I think we should stay in the horror movie and put ourselves in a bad place. I think because of that, it makes the characters pretty flat, where I think having the group of 4 people being able to bounce the conversations really helped out with the pacing and really helped out with the character development, where I think we kind of ran into a lot of really flat downbeats in The Girl in Cabin 13 because you only had 2 options to go through. So what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we definitely learned about it. It definitely was the feedback as far as like characters gaslighting each other. But if you have, and I do think like what you mentioned, this is a huge indie pitfall. I think it's extremely, extremely difficult to write a horror movie with only 2 characters, right? Because like he said, like Kel said, they either stay or they go. And so you're constantly hemming and hawing over, should they stay or should they go? And usually you have one character who wants to go and one character to stay. The problem in a movie, a one location movie with like Girl in Cabin 13 is like, you can't really move them forward as characters because they're always, either going to stay or go, and they're stuck in one location. So there's really not like anything else they could do other than constantly bring up the fact that they should stay or they should go, or should they go outside, or should they try and go to the car. So you kind of get pigeonholed in like this little area of, dialogue that is repetitive. People don't really like when they gaslight people, because it is true. It's like, both characters cannot be like, yes, this is a messed up situation, let's get out of here, because then you don't have a horror movie. So I definitely think if you're looking to make a horror movie with one location, 2 characters, where things kind of get intense very quickly, I try and add in a small character or a side character or something, and you see it a lot in a lot of horror movies if you look for it, if you know what to look for. And usually that other character is on a cell phone, or they're talking to them on the phone, or they're trying to come rescue them, or they had like a plot device earlier in the movie and that person's coming to get them. So you have like this car thing that you can kind of like cut to them, and just gives you a nice cutaway point, kind of gives you good tension because that, you know, that help is on the way. Um, and I think that you just have to have multiple characters. Looking at how difficult it was to edit The Girl in Cabin 13, to how easy it was to edit The Murder House with Kel in the van, and even as I'm going through The Shapeshifter now, it doesn't, like, we did a lot of work to make sure the characters in The Shapeshifter didn't gaslight each other, but it's just very easy because all the characters have their motivations. Not one of them is like, hey, like, let's just get completely out of here. Everyone kind of like works off each other. And I think it's just a more natural performance. And then even in the climax of The Shapeshifter, we have the girl running through the woods, we have Dylan in the woods, we have the creatures after both of them, and then we have a character trying to come and save them as well. So we have even more cut points than we did in The Murder House. And I think it just, you know, going back to, you know, having the editor's mindset allows you to kind of like twist and mold that climax how you see fit, just to give it the, you know, the extra oomph and really make sure it's long, because you really want these climaxes to be 10 or 15 minutes long to give them that satisfaction. I think a lot of indie films fall short as far as their climax, and we've had that before because we've always had the final girl getting chased by the monster, and it's just very difficult to cut that together and give it the length that it deserves.
Yeah, it really is something where I think it helps out with the most critical thing in movies, and we'll kind of hop right into it, is pacing. And one thing I want to mention about this movie, when we look at our movies, I think you can always kind of figure out like, hey, these are the scenes that lag on a long time, like this is where it drags on for whatever reason, this is the slow part of the movie. I think it's something that we're more conscious of now more than ever. I mean, like, just watching The Shapeshifter roughs, I think it moves even more. So I think we're continuing to improve on it, but I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the pacing because of having multiple characters, because any cut whatsoever will allow you to really kind of change up the movement, especially if you have two conversations going on at the same time, which is typically what we had happen. We could cut back to Cal. There was multiple ways that you can interpret what was going on. And that effect in itself is so much more powerful than what I see happen a ton of times in indie filmmaker when you have the two characters, is that static shots of back, forth, A, B. So kind of, do you want to talk about how the pacing increases that? And, real quick, with us being said, we're going to be the biggest components of keeping it small, keeping it as limited as possible. But I really do think, Girl in Cabin 13 was almost the smallest set scale, and now we're kind of bouncing back, and what we bounce back with, it allows you to have much better pacing because of the group setting as well.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you've heard us talk about it before. Pacing with, as far as distribution companies and how you actually can get paid, is by far the most important thing. It's where you should be focusing almost 100% of your attention. We want to avoid any slow downbeats. When we gave the feedback to the super fans in the Discord, the only scene that caused issues as far as slowdown was the beginning scene with the officer, because we only had one character. There was nothing else we were cutting back to or cutting around to. And look at this, it's the slowest scene in the movie. So we had to find a way to cut it down so that still made sense and still built tension. But I think I knocked maybe 2 minutes off that scene and just really cut down to the essential shots that I wanted, because it was like a little bit of a slow burn. And I did want to, build tension. And if we were to do, the Murder House again, I would have either two officers in there, or I try and probably play around with, either the POV of the girl who's like being held hostage, or even the POV, or just cuts of the actual killer, just to have multiple cuts in there, because I think that was the scene that dragged the most, but it was necessary. I think we did a good job of pacing it, because you didn't want to have that pop at the end, to to keep people hooked. And so far, the data that we're getting to come in is showing that this movie hooked people enough for them to, you know, continue watching.
And that's always the most important part. And, I really do think, again, having that group dynamic was a big one. And that's what made the writing process for it pretty fun. I think another thing to kind of mention for this one is, my biggest takeaway on the negative side of things is I think we really kind of learned that having everything at night really kind of gives you a very specific look, where if I had to point to the biggest issue with the murder house, is it doesn't look as beautiful cinematically as the girl in cabin 13, or especially now the shapeshifter, just because you do only have one set, one time location, and one area. I mean, it does move up a few things here and there, but I think it really, to me, highlighted that, having multiple locations really does show off your production value and being strategic about them. And I think we were very strategic in Shapeshifter and just making it look like there's a whole wide dynamic based on day shots, night shots, and having more time frame. But what was kind of your opinion? Because I would say that was my big takeaway in something that I would look to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you were to look back on the notes I would give myself, I would say, you know, I picked a bad location and I picked like my cinema, the way I would lit that whole movie was poor. Um, I think the location we were scrapped for time, that we didn't have as many options as we usually do. And the location we had in Girl in Cabin 13, the cabin was just beautiful. It was a great cinematic, you know, location. The light looked great. Everything was great in that. And the same thing with the Shapeshifters, a giant property. They had Christmas lights all over the place, a lot of like windows to have natural light. It was just very easy to shoot in there. In the murder house, the location was very small. The house was very, very tiny. And we had to put up, you know, the boards on the windows. So there was almost no light coming through. So it was almost shooting completely flat all the way through. There was no long hallways or ways we could really create depth. I think you look at like the Ouija board scene when we were in the garage and how we shot that. I think that scene looks really, really good because we had depth. Really, anything in the garage worked really well because we had the depth to play around with. But the rest of the house was very tight, very cramped. There were multiple times where I was very uncomfortable with how we were shooting it, just because like of how cramped it was. I wasn't able to use the lenses that I wanted to use. I was trying to hide things. But I mean, even just going back on the lighting, you know, this comes back to a learning process. I really wanted to try and have minimalistic lighting and realistic lighting. And that was a mistake. And I'll tell you that was a mistake because in that house is supposed to be completely dark, right? But you still have to light people. So we were like bouncing light off the walls. We were using very small lights just to get like the minimal amount of light to, you know, make it look decent. So it's very flat lighting. And then the shapeshifter, I was like, well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And it's like, I don't really care what the motivation of the lights are. I'm going to make it look as cinematic as possible and see if people get bothered by this. And if you're an indie filmmaker, obviously you don't have time to really set up your lights. You don't have time to, you know, have a whole lighting team with you. If you have to choose, just light it cinematically. Nobody has brought it up. Everyone is completely fine with it. And honestly, if you watch enough horror movies, they're running through the woods and the woods are like perfectly lit in the middle of the night. So if you have a choice, you know, I'm always trying to be as realistic and gritty as possible, but I think that yes, you can kind of cheat the cinematic lighting, but once again, that just comes from experience. And it'll be a good split test to see, you know, people's reaction with the shapeshifter versus the reaction with the murder house and how we lit both of those movies.
Yeah, it really is the case where, I think you just learn from it. And I think this stems from one of the biggest issues that we had with the first rendition of this with the Suicide House, which is we left the lights on. So I think we kind of pulled back from that. We ended up having this instead. And, I think you just, again, pendulum back and forth. We learned a lot from it. I still think it has a much better look than, like the Suicide House. But I think that's something we learned. Just, you really do kind of want to throw those things in there when you do have a smart strategic chance for it. So One thing I wanted to kind of talk about now is moving into the acting element of this. I think it was something where, we had an amazing cast again. We brought Dylan back from Girl in Cabin 13. We had Sarah as our lead for Harper, and then Tyler as the lead for Kai. And then we had me. I'm sorry for my performance, everyone out there, but we had me in the van. So it was kind of something when it comes to having this cast, since me and Dylan were familiar with the process, we're pretty much halfway there when it comes to getting the idea and the mindset together. And I think it's something we experienced again in Shapeshifter. But do you want to kind of briefly talk about how just managing the cast and the expectation? I think we had a very solid team. And I think it was something where everyone was really on the same page right from the get-go. And I think this goes, one, to the pre-production, as you mentioned before, but then also the benefits of just having experience, and more importantly, having other actors who have experience too. It's easy for us to onboard new people. And I think this is one of the big downfalls with indie film and indie sets is when you do have different teams and whatnot, it just takes a little bit longer for everyone to get cohesive. Whereas for us, we can kind of hop right into it.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a way to experience or kind of tell people exactly what our sets are like until you just kind of experience it yourself, because we go so fast, we, work so quickly and so efficiently that it's just difficult to articulate that when I'm doing pre-production or I'm doing actor interviews for the first time. To give you an example, I told Dylan, what we were to expect in Girl in Cabin 13. And then when we hired again for the Murder House, he's like, oh, this time, like, I know what to do. Like, I'm prepared. I know exactly what to do. And I made it clear to both Tyler and Sarah, but I think it still took them a little bit to just understand, like, wow, this is like when these guys are saying they're doing 12 pages a day, they're actually doing 12 pages a day, and how quickly we move, through scene by scene. I think it does take a little bit, but even in the Shapeshifter, we had Tyler back, we had Chloe back. I think that one was very cohesive as far as like everyone understanding what to do. But I mean, with each movie, we're doing more pre-production. I think that's pretty much the biggest thing is like, where do I spend most of my time? Pre-production. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. The actors, I thought Sarah did a phenomenal job as far as like pre-production. She had notes, she asked questions, she was trying to understand her character. And I think that shows. I think that was one of the best performances we've had in DBS history. I think the reviews that are coming to show that she did an unbelievable job. And she was like taking her finals in the middle of this movie. So like, shout out to her. She did a great job. But it just comes down to, making sure your pre-production's done. You have just as much of a responsibility as an actor to work with the director and ask questions and, bring up things ahead of time, because when you're on set, you really do not want to be, having large conversations about dialogue or character motivations. That stuff should have happened way before you even step on set.
Yeah, I think it really shows in the not only the onset production, but also in the performance, and allows us to really focus on, what you need to focus on, which is the actual filming of the scene and not kind of what goes into the scene. I think you're seeing that more and more with our production. So really kind of the last thing I want to touch on, because again, in this episode, we're just going to be higher up concepts, where the next episode will kind of go scene by scene. But I think two other big things that ended up happening here. One, this was also our second time basically going out into the distribution element. And I think we had a lot more experience with it. So we'll kind of talk about what we're thinking and how it's going to play out from there. But before we do that, I do want to highlight, this was the first time we had the superfan community and the first time they were able to watch our rough. And because of the data and the feedback we got from the rough, we were able to really, really make some great cuts to just get a better idea of what our audience is looking for. So do you want to kind of talk about the benefits of that and how it really played such a major role in the Shapeshifter? Because again, Girl in Cabin 13 was done before we started doing this, but when we started getting momentum with the super fans, we were in the final cuts. I remember showing them some pictures of us filming and doing the pickups and everything. So this is really the first time the super fans were part of the process. And man, did they already help out a ton when it came to giving us like data for the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues with indie films is like you're just not getting feedback that you need on the scale that you need. Usually in Hollywood, they'll rent out theaters and just get a ton of people to give feedback to it, so they can make changes. or they'll use the festival circuit as a way to make changes before a release. As an indie filmmaker, you just don't have access to that. Your access is your friends and family, which for most people is probably 8 to 10 people. And those people have a vested interest in you as a human being. So they're not going to give you true feedback. They're gonna be like, oh, good job. You really tried. This is cool. And they may just, sugarcoat a lot of things. We were able to get, I think, maybe 80 to 100 different, Google form feedbacks. And, I came in there and said, hey, look, I want the most brutal feedback that you guys can give me. Don't hold back. The more brutal, the harder, the better. Any small kind of details that you guys see, let me know, because I can still fix this. And, the feedback was great. And I took all of it to heart. We found the stuff that people really were bothered by, which was usually the opening scene, which is too slow. I knocked off 2 minutes of that. We fixed up a couple of scenes. And to, my surprise, a lot of the scenes that I thought were going to be issues, people really, really liked. So I think having that feedback is so critical. I'd love to go back and see if I can find the super fans cut versus, what we actually ended up using, because there's a lot of changes in there. And I think a lot of those changes made the movie much, much, much better. And, having that feedback is just so valuable. And I think as the super fans get more comfortable with giving feedback, I think the feedback will get better, and then our movies will get better as well.
Yeah, it really is the case where you end up seeing the improvement that you get just based on what everyone's saying, and to be able to point back to it and really just look at like one specific item. Like, for instance, the intro that you mentioned was taking a lot longer to progress than we were expecting. I'd kind of point the finger at it. You'd kind of point the finger at it to some degree, but getting the data back from the super fans and basically them telling us, this is actually a lot longer than we're expecting. We asked them the most, critical question in any part of the pacing, which is, will you continue to watch from here? And with that being said, we were able to pinpoint what was the slow points in the movie. Realistically, there were some little parts here and there, but then also it gave us a better idea of, what we could expect to hit. Did this scene hit? Did that scare hit? And those are things we were able to take into the production of The Shapeshifter. I mean, we were able to use the data we got from the editing process to understand what scenes are better, directly write those scenes into the movie process for the next films, and then directly benefit from them and utilize them. So I think it's something really great. And then the last thing I really kind of want to touch on, because it is something that it's just such a long process to make a film for any filmmaker. And one of the biggest experiences that I think you end up getting that a lot of people don't get, just because, again, the limited amount of at-bats they get, is we were really geared for, the distribution process from the beginning of this one. So do you want to kind of talk about how, after having a movie that's been through distribution, the benefits of that experience and understanding, and just how it allows you to, take a second look at the process of it, understand what works, what doesn't work, and just to the degree of, you don't really understand until you've been through that process once. And I would say we're still understanding it, but do you want to kind of talk about the benefit of that and why we think it's really gave us a better idea of the landscape? And I think The Haunting of the Murder House is really set up for success because of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything in the filmmaking process, which is like why distribution is so important, because so many filmmakers just, they think that their job is to make a movie, and really you have to go all the way through the process. And the distribution process is very, very dangerous, because you're working with some of these companies that are still stuck in the early 2010s. So their business model has not adapted to the streaming platforms. You have a lot of distribution companies out there that don't have your best interest in heart, that they are looking to just get a paycheck or just eat up all your royalties. And then there's some good ones out there, but I think figuring out who it is, because you only have so many shots with your movie, is very, very difficult. This one, I did a lot more research. I was more comfortable as far as like the contracts go. I reached out to filmmakers. I went on a lot of filmmaker forums to see who people are recommending. And then I kind of made a curated list of about 15 to 20 distribution companies that I felt comfortable, working with. And, we started submitting to those companies. And I think we didn't really get turned down by anybody. They all said they wanted to work with us. But here's the thing, like the distribution companies, they do take a lot of films. It's not as curated as you really think it is. So it just comes down to who gave us the best contract. And the company that we went with now, I heard really good reviews. And one of the other things, it's just not just the royalty splits and how they're actually going to, promote your movie. It's speed. For the last distribution deal we had, the movie was completed and passed quality control at the end of August, but it didn't go live for, I think, until the middle of December. And that's just another 3 or 4 months you're just sitting around. And so speed was one of the biggest things. I said, look, to all these distribution companies, I said, look, I need to know like how quickly we can get this movie out. Like that is the biggest thing to me, because I want to be able to get it out. I want to be able to get feedback, and I want to, learn from that feedback. And obviously we want to start getting royalties to accrue. And this one, was the fastest one. So I took that into consideration, and they were true to their word. They told me 7 to 30 days, and it was out in 7 days. And it was kind of a shock that I didn't believe that they would actually get it done in 7 days. So we're kind of playing catch up as far as like getting everything ready to go. So, it's just, there's a lot of things you got to figure out. You got to figure out what your goals are, what you're trying to do, and work with it. But it's much easier the second time. I think Shapeshifter is going to be even easier. You start to kind of see the people you want to work with, and then, help mold your business plan around those, the people that you want to work with.
Yeah, it really is the case. And again, a lot of filmmakers don't even get that experience that we've been able to have, in the sense of getting distribution and then working with distributors, and now just having a better understanding of the process. So I think that having the same understanding of, what our audience is, what they're looking for, those things, it's really, really great to see. And, the last thing I really kind of wanted to mention as we're wrapping up, I think one thing we're already seeing again is the power of this community. And it is just amazing seeing the support that The Haunting of the Murder House has gotten within the first 24 hours. All of our fans watching it, the feedback that we're getting, it really is everyone celebrating the success of this, because we had 4 super fans in it. We're going to have plenty more in the community to be part of these. So you just want to talk about the difference that, knowing when we release, we instantly have the support of our fans, and just how important that is, not only for us, but just the success of the movie. This is what the distribution, this is what the algorithms want to see, people who like these movies. And by showing that right away, it just gets us to meet so many more fans who are like the ones that are already in our Discord. And it's such a powerful thing to have.
No, it really is. And I mean, you want to get as many people to watch the movie as possible, but it just creates momentum. I mean, the actors are reading the reviews, the distribution companies are reading reviews, and they're like, oh, well, these guys, because no one really believes me when I talk about like the super fan community, because everyone's got, it's very easy to fake likes and fake engagement on these social media platforms. So they're like, oh, we don't really know. And then we come out and, the movie's trending on Amazon already. We have a ton of reviews on it. IMDb's going nuts. It's one of the top watch movies on, IMDb right now. So it's like how quickly all this stuff grows is just, crazy. And so I think it's one thing for me to say the power of our community, but it's another thing to see them in action. And they stepped up. I mean, I'm with the Kickstarter and this launch, I mean, I'm pretty much over the moon. I couldn't ask for anything more. And just like I'm getting better with each movie, each release is going to get stronger. The DBS army is only going to grow. And we're just going to continue to grow together exponentially.
I mean, I think that's the biggest thing I always point to, is just it's unstoppable momentum now. So massive thank you to everyone. Again, in our next episode, we're going to kind of break down scene by scene, talk about what we like, what we didn't like, a little bit of the reviews of the movie ourselves. But this was just kind of highlight our overall attitude. We're very excited, as you can hear. If you want to be part of this, if you want to support us, go ahead, watch The Haunting of the Murder House on Amazon. Be sure to go ahead and leave us a review. We love that. But as always, make sure you join our Discord channel. We make movies for our fans, with our fans, and that is the place to be. So until then, have a good one.